Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Evan Troxel. I'm glad that you're here. This is a special video that I wanted to put up. It was actually a presentation that I gave. I was asked to give it to the AIA Palm Beach chapter by a friend of mine, and he graciously invited me to present to their group on disruptive technologies in architecture. Some disruption is a loaded word. I know that, but I wanted to kind of show some different things that I think are exciting technologies in the field of architecture, showing some things that are coming, some things that are happening now, and also just generally talking about how technology is changing the profession of architecture. And I wanted to put it on YouTube and not my podcast because there's a lot of visuals that go along with this. So I put together this whole presentation. I do show some examples. I'm going to put some links to those companies that are creating this technology in the description below. So make sure you check out those as well. Lots of amazing stuff in this presentation, and I'm not taking credit for it. I just want to expose it to the profession because I think a lot of times we get stuck with our blinders on trying to deliver projects and we're not really coming up for air and taking a look at what's going on in the greater landscape of the architectural profession and how it's radically changing right now, especially now during the time where we rely on technology so heavily that it's really taking off and it's really pushing the boundaries of, I think, what we all thought was maybe possible before. It's not only showing that it is possible, but it's happening way faster than we ever thought that it would. So without further ado, I'm going to jump over into the presentation here. And Javier Salas, who is the president of the AIA Palm Beach chapter, is going to introduce me and then we'll get right into the presentation. All right, here we go.
Hello, guys. Hello, AIA Palm Beach. We're very happy to have Evan Troxel. Evan is a licensed architect in the state of California. I believe he practices in Southern California. He's an author of ARE hacks. He's a designer, educator, musician, artist, podcaster. He has two of the most interesting podcasts right now, ArchiSpeak, which I've been related to. It's been like 7 years or so. Great podcast, and he's also on TRXL. Evan, we're very happy and very excited to have you today. Evan will be talking about disruptive technologies in architecture. And please, if you have any questions that you want us to address, please put them on the chat box, and we'll address them at the end. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks, Javier. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've never been to Florida. I'm a California guy. And unfortunately, because as you guys are well aware of the rocket launch that happened yesterday, that's been like a dream of mine, is to go see that sometime. That would just be amazing. As somebody who grew up during the whole space shuttle mission age, and actually, I think I was in the 6th grade when the Challenger incident happened, and that's just like something that really has stuck in my mind all these years. And now kind of watching the triumphant return of space travel is super cool. So again, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. My name is Evan Troxel. I'm talking today about disruptive technologies in architecture, and disruptive is kind of a buzzword. I think we've heard it quite a bit. So I'll get into that a little bit, because it's also, we could also describe this as emerging technologies in architecture, but I think it is really good for architects to frame this as disruptive technologies, because we should be very acutely aware of what's going on in our profession and what's coming from the outside of our profession to potentially just grab hold of some of the inefficiencies that we do have. So I wanted to quickly kind of just talk about who I am here. As Javier mentioned, I wrote a book called ARE Hacks, just basically hacking yourself and strategies to pass AREs. So it's been a great resource for people looking to become licensed and who, like me, waited way too long to make that happen. And so then, there's there's career, there's kids, there's all kinds of stuff going on, there's COVID, there's all of these kind of outside time pressure things that go on, and the book is really about how to kind of overcome that. And it's not tips and tricks for passing the questions in the exam. It's more about how to hack your life to do that. So it's a resource that's available, and of course available on Amazon, as everything else in the whole world is. Javier also mentioned ArchiSpeak, which is a podcast of mine we've been doing we're coming up on the end of 8 years of that. So we started at the end of 2012, and it was every 2 weeks, but now it's twice a week because commuting times have changed drastically. We've kind of reformatted the show to be 20-minute or so long episodes a couple times a week. And it's really just about how it's what it's like to work in the profession of architecture. We get a lot of different listeners, all the way from college students through retirees listening to this, and everybody in between, and lots of good feedback. And then my most recent kind of venture is with a new podcast that I launched in June called Troxel, and it's really about how tech is changing the profession of architecture. So lots of long form conversations that I've always had with people and wanted to make available. And so, I feel like there's a lot of value in these conversations for people to listen in on. So that's what I did. I made it available to everybody. And I think you'll see that as a common thread is I love sharing. I love talking about what we do as architects and helping people understand the value that we add to the world. I'm also the director of digital practice at HMC Architects. We are about a 300-person firm in mostly California and a little bit in Arizona. And we do healthcare, K-12, and higher education work. Our digital practice team is everything about technology for the firm to run. So this really is my passion. I actually grew up pretty much at HMC as a designer, and as a senior designer, just really kind of was shifted over to seeing these needs that I'll be talking about today in the profession of architecture and making that happen for HMC, and actually putting a lot of it on display for the rest of the world too, so that we can move forward together. Like I said, disruption's kind of a buzzword, and I actually have a talk on YouTube that I gave in one of our offices. I guess it was about almost 2 years ago now, about we will be disrupted. And I have a lecture series that I had started there called OK Computer, and this was just one of those initial kind of lectures that I gave because I wanted to kind of set the tone that if we don't disrupt ourselves, somebody else will. And disruption, like I said, is a interesting word. We could also talk about emerging technologies, but I go pretty deep in that talk into the definition of disruption, the theory that Clayton Christensen innovated on, the innovator's dilemma, actually. So if you are interested in that, I've definitely check that out and go to my YouTube channel, which is, I'll have a link to it later in the presentation here for you to kind of remember that. But first, what I wanted to do before I kind of jump into the meat of this quick presentation is I want to start off with something a little bit on the lighter side. And this is a 4-minute long video, so bear with me, but maybe you can relate to these two kids trying to figure out how to operate a rotary phone.
Okay, so go ahead and lift up the box. You have 4 minutes to dial the next phone number.
That's it?
That's it. With that phone.
Wait, so you have to push it.
Kyle, move your butt over. I don't want your butt in the video. There you go.
It's all the way from here.
Yeah.
7. Oh no, 0's all the way over. How about restart?
I love how they pick the phone up and put it back down. I love that.
That's so funny.
This is a painful video to watch, right? It's hilarious though.
Another 0.
Or do you go all the way around back here?
Keep in mind, it's only 4 minutes. This won't go on forever.
Ah, yeah, we got it. Okay. All the way around. There you go. 7. 0 all the way around. 3. Oh baby. 8. 5. 0 all the way around.
Okay, so I'll give you a hint. Your 0 is correct. Every other way you're doing it is incorrect. Is that correct in saying that?
Yeah. So you don't stop at this. Oh, just the last one? Because look.
You just successfully dialed 0.
No, stop. Okay. So,
Wait, so when we go like this, they said that was right.
Kyle, move to your right a little bit, please.
I don't like that.
So, all right. So if this was 0, then.
Wait.
Does the second one
Watch out.
0? The second
Is
one
this correct?
0?
Bring it all the way around and then like, bruh.
Wait, look. That's 0, so that's one ahead. What if you want to just.
You guys have made this all worth it.
Everyone has struggled like you guys.
Yeah, everybody has.
I think of different.
Wait a minute.
Think of different.
Do we have to pick up the phone and then do it?
Put the phone to your ear. What do you hear? What does it sound like? Okay, that's a start.
All right, watch out.
Correct for a 0.
What does 0 sound like? What does 0 sound like?
It just goes and ends it. Okay.
You have 1 minute left.
So if the 0 is correct, what are you doing with the 0?
You guys are doing great because you're talking through it. You're working through it.
Yeah, we're all
We went all
came
the-
last place.
We
So
went all the way over here. I think you have to go all the way around. All the way around. Stop there.
what's with all the holes though?
It's a great question. Yes.
We are so done.
No, you're not. You
Kyle
nailed
just
it.
figured it out. 25 seconds.
How many numbers?
708, 703. Where are you at right now?
7,
Oh,
0.
8500.
Hurry up.
8500. 8500. Oh, you did it?
No, I didn't. It was-
He just gave up.
5 seconds to do it.
0.
You did it.
0. We did it.
Thanks for bearing with me on that one. You know, I think there's a couple of things that really stand out to me and how I wanted to frame this talk around that was obviously there's embedded kind of unsurfaced knowledge in that device and in the parents, right? As they're kind of holding their tongues, not wanting to step in and just see what the kids do. But also it was just kind of weird how, or interesting, I should say, how like the mom was like, well, there's a dial tone, duh. Everybody knows what, like there is no dial tone anymore, right? So there was still kind of this, like she expected them to know what that was, and there was no way they were going to know what that was. And so this kind of comes into the second thing that really stands out to me is this mentoring idea, where obviously with this, they were trying to let the kids totally figure it out on their own. But I think that these are two takeaways that we can look at with the way that we practice architecture and people coming into and the future leaders of our firms and our profession, right? So we'll come back to this in a little bit. So first, the data of AEC, and I just want to kind of preface this and say historical data, meaning we're going to look at some charts and graphs. You may have seen these already, but they're kind of eye-opening. So here is a McKinsey chart. I'm just going to have a few McKinsey charts here for a second, just talking about digitization of various industries. And so you can kind of see here that, you know, we're going to fall under the construction industry, and we're second from the bottom on digitization of industries. You've probably seen this one too, where this is the productivity index since 1964, construction or AEC, has actually gone down, and all other industries on average have gone up. Here's one that's a little bit more current. It goes up to 2011 in this case, and you can see we're actually starting to rise back up a little bit. I'm guessing that that's BIM at that point, among other things. And so you can still see that we're way behind other industries as a measuring stick. And then this is one that I think is just kind of the most graphically interesting to look at. It really shows that we kind of did go up, and then we've also come back down, and maybe we're starting to trend a little bit up, but construction is the red line, and agriculture at the top. So productivity has really jumped in a lot of these via automation, via assembly line, via a lot of things that may or may not fit into the practice that we do, but still just comparing different industries together. This is kind of a wake-up call, I would say. And so, you know, going back to the rotary phone, you know, somebody said the AEC industry is the rotary phone. I'm not quite sure who said that. Might have just been this presentation. But really what I want to get at here is that we need to get out of our own way and disrupt ourselves. I think a lot of times we think that this is somebody else's job. And that's fine. You can totally think that this is somebody else's job, or we can be the designers of our future and do it ourselves. And I would also note that we need to do it with intention. We want to have a future in this profession. We want there to be a profession in the future. I think we need to intentionally get out of our own way and disrupt ourselves. So thinking about that, I mean, one thing that I don't think we can argue with is that technology is moving faster than we have been implementing it. If you think about the way that we practice even with BIM, it's basically kind of a glorified or modern version of the drafting board. It's still treated as the same output, right? It's still a roll of drawings. It's still two-dimensional views on sheets. And so technology is definitely moving faster than we are implementing it in our profession. And I would say that, you know, this innovation is accelerating exponentially. Disruption is inevitable. You can look around and see things that Silicon Valley in particular is coming for in our profession. And digital transformation is unavoidable, and we get to choose whether we want to do that or not. It's going to happen either way. I will throw a quick little but in there. This is something that I put in a lot of presentations because I think it really hits home. There are two things that architects hate: the way things are and change. And this is something that we're constantly caught in the middle of, right? We're busy, we have our heads down, we've got deadlines, we've got budgets to meet, we've got clients pulling on us from every direction. We don't really have time to come up for air. But at the same time, we really don't care for the way things are. We want things to be better. We just don't actually want to change either. So like I said, we're kind of stuck in the middle. And it's true that I think the elephant in the room is that people do avoid change, and that is actually the hardest thing about implementing new technology, is that people don't want to change in our profession. So our relationships are our currency, right? This is how architecture has operated for the last 100 years, right? You build relationships, you build around your clientele and what they need. We also rely heavily on our drawings. Those are our currency. That's our deliverable. That's what people are paying for ultimately. And I also throw in another but here. This is something that we need to be paying attention to nowadays, which is data is the new currency. And this graphic has been going around for years now by a company named Case, who started a consulting firm. They came out of Shop Architects in New York City and basically started building tools for architects and for AEC. And their mantra was buildings equal data. And so that's really where I start to get excited about some of the new tools and how they can give us insight into the way people actually use the buildings. and the way that they're performing. And that really, to me, is where the value proposition of architecture fits into it in a really nice way, is that we actually can measure the performance of the buildings and verify that they're doing what we say that they're doing. So some emerging technology examples, some tools that we've built in-house, and I'm sure that you guys are probably doing the same thing, you know, where you actually now have the ability to build our own tools inside applications like Rhino and Revit to do specific things that our practices need. This is a quick little example of a massing blocking diagram that's built from a spreadsheet, right? So anybody can enter data into the spreadsheet and it just automatically shows up in the 3D environment for us to then kind of go through and do different adjacency studies and stacking and blocking. Another example here is we built this facade tool to go through various design options for louvers. And of course, you know, you could model lots of variations for louvers, but can you optimize it for various constraints like daylighting optimization or energy efficient optimization? And then can you overlay data on top of those so that you know the exact angle that those louvers are sitting at, and you know the count of them and the quantity takeoffs and things like that. So we have the ability to write these applications in-house. These are a couple of examples of that. That's exactly what we've done. We're also getting into simulation. In this case, this is CFD analysis, which is computational fluid dynamics for wind studies on a campus. We did a science building, and we had to verify that the stacks that were the exhaust for the science labs were not getting put into a place where they're going to be in the wake of an intake for another building, for instance. Or you might want to do a study to make sure that a courtyard isn't going to be full of eddies, things like that. And then getting outside of the work that we're doing in our company, I'm really excited about things like Hypar, which is a building generator based on functions. So you can see kind of a stack of functions on the left. You can create a free account at hypar.io. There's a little link in the lower left-hand corner there, so you can get the spelling. And basically, this entire building is generated with 2 polylines, one for the building and one for the parking lot. And so I locate the building, I tell it where my site is within that boundary polygon that I was just talking about. It builds an envelope, it builds levels, it builds structure, it builds a facade, and then the parking lot is based on that. And my company actually wrote the parking lot script for that. So we made that available to anybody in the world who wants to create an account at Hypar for free and start generating buildings. So pretty cool. There's a lot of code under there, but anybody can throw these functions in there and start generating things immediately with little to no training. Pretty fascinating to kind of see the disintermediation of expertise via web-based platforms like these. Any client could just go to this website and start generating buildings. It doesn't have to be an architect, for instance. So let that sink in. This is an example of something I'm pretty excited about by a consultant called Proving Ground. They're generating data through Power BI out of Rhino models. And it's great because you can actually just embed this on a web page and send it to a client and have them look through various design options and see where the money goes based on their program. So again, lots and lots of web-based tools. As you may have noticed in the last 9 months, we live on the web now, right? So web-based tools are the ultimate collaboration tool. Here's a TestFit. I'm going to turn the volume down on this because we don't need to hear it. But something else I'm pretty excited about here with TestFit is a building generator, a scheme generator for different options. Street generator, you can see it dynamically updates in real time as you move these polygons around, and you can put your program in there and generate different schemes. It really started out as a multifamily housing generator. It's turned into a parking generator. It's turned into various densities for residential now as well. They're just doing some really amazing stuff. So it's all interesting because it's based on algorithms. It's an app that runs on your computer, on any computer, and it's a subscription service. So pretty cool stuff. Getting into the construction side of things, right? All that's what kind of early planning stuff. But this right here is, a point cloud data capture of a building so that you could measure off of it and potentially compare it to your model during construction, or get exact measurements within 1 millimeter after the building has been built. You can snap to all those points. It's a very large data set, and you can do this inside a building and outside a building. So inside a building, you can do it with LiDAR scanning. Outside a building, you can do it with a drone and photogrammetry, where it's taking a bunch of photos of a building and then making it into a 3D model based on comparing the data between photos to basically come up with distances between pixels. It generates a model from that. You can merge all of that together into one model, get an inside-out building of existing conditions in a rather short period of time, and it's insanely accurate. Another way that we're capturing information inside of buildings is with robots like this from Boston Dynamics. This is Spot. You can see a LiDAR scanner on the back of this robot. You can see an actuated arm on the front of this thing, so it can grab something like a doorknob and turn it and go through that door. And every time that this thing runs through your building, it gets smarter. So pretty interesting technology, because it can go in places that are potentially hazardous. It can go there, it doesn't care what the weather's like. It can basically run a loop every day and track changes on the job site. Pretty interesting construction technology applications for things like that. And then on a larger scale, we're now seeing like tractors like this grader here with GPS poles on either side of the scraper. And basically people are designing the pathways for this thing on a computer, and then the tractor can go out and either with a driver driving the tractor or without a driver, it can scrape insanely accurately. So the way technology is kind of infiltrating the construction side of the business is probably even at a higher rate than the architecture side of the business. Shift gears here for a moment and just talk about communication. One of the things that this is like my main job as a director of digital practice at HMC, and I do this via many avenues. Communication is the job of a leader. And so if you're on this call, you're a leader. You don't have to be designated as a leader. I just love that you're here, you're getting information, and you're gonna hopefully share that information with others. And that's all about communicating. And one way that I do that is on YouTube. So here's my YouTube link. You can check out these videos that I made these are basically internal communication focused videos, but I make them available to everybody because there's lots of firms going through this transformation together. And if there's no good examples out there, how do we know what to do? How do we know what other people are doing? How can we build upon what they're doing? I mean, this is really my view is that we need to do this together. And so I'm trying to do my part and share how we're going through that digital transformation at HMC. I talk about different conferences that I've been to. I talk about different initiatives that we're doing inside the firm and exposing those outside of the firm, different like hackathons that we're participating in, different workflows that we're developing. So that's one way that I do it. The other way I do it is through that lecture series that I talked about in the beginning, where I talk about disruption, but I have a few other ones on drones, on autonomous vehicles, and the impact that they're going to have on our cities and in our profession as well. These are ways that I communicate also with the podcast, right? So the podcasts, I think that it's really important to share what we're doing and to enable people inside our industry, the echo chamber, but also outside, see what's going on. I think it's really important, and it is incumbent upon us to do that. If we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it for us. I also do recruiting through various ways. I did create a video and put it on the YouTube channel. I want to attract talent. I'm not going to wait around for them to come to me. While I build this, I want to inspire them and attract them. So one thing that we did in our company was created this kind of hexagonal shaped card, and we embedded an NFC sticker inside of it that you can just get off of Amazon. You can program that sticker to do whatever you want. All you do is hold your phone up to it, and it automatically launches a YouTube video on the phone. And I thought it was a really neat way to kind of engage somebody beyond the typical idea of a business card so that they could have an interactive experience. And I took these cards to Autodesk University a year ago. And out of that, we actually grew our team pretty substantially because people were just kind of immediately saw us as a little bit different, a little bit more forward thinking. And this is a great little marketing tool for me and my team, but it's also a great marketing tool for you and your team to do whatever you want with something like this. So it's a really cool thing because a lot of business cards end up in the trash, but my goal was to make something that somebody might take, use, and then hand it to somebody else and say, hey, check this cool thing out. And then it just kind of naturally has its own organic path that it takes from there. Last thing that I'll talk about here is just make it real. My idea with this was when you're communicating, it doesn't always make sense to just do it over digital. It also makes sense to do it analog. And so you can kind of see in the graphic here, it's a piece of geometry that we 3D printed. The idea is that, again, remember who your audience is. A lot of times if you're not a senior leader in your firm and you're an emerging professional and you want to communicate with those senior leaders, think about how they communicate. Think about how they grew up in our profession and turn your ideas into real things that people can hold. That is what architects do. They synthesize ideas into reality. And so if you can do that on smaller scales, if you can turn these things into actual, real, analog things, I think that really speaks to a lot of people. It's neat. It's surprising in a purely digital world for the most part, where everything is going on our computers and our phones, and it kind of switches things up and it changes perception. So that's definitely a cool thing to do every once in a while, is to take your stuff. And I don't just mean like architectural models, but algorithms that you design that do cool things on facades, print them out, make them real. And that really does help communicate those ideas to other people. So with that, I think I'll pause right there and just leave that up. And then maybe, Javier, we can go through some of the questions that you had posed to me over email, or if anybody else wanted to type some into the chat, I'd be happy to keep going with this conversation.
Thank you. Yes, please, if you guys have questions, make sure to put them on the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and intervene on our presentation. Yeah, so Evan, one of the things that surprises me most is that it seems like there was a point in time back in the Renaissance where architects were involved in different fields of art. After that, then we had that period on the modern movement where there was also that idea of the total work of art. Later on, we came back to the drafting board, just focused on architecture. But it really surprises me that now it's all about multimedia. You were talking about learning how to code, digital fabrication, photography, drone. I've been seeing people writing musical scores to their own presentations. So do you still identify as an architect, and are you reinventing the Renaissance man? Do you think there's something about that?
I think that's just kind of how I'm wired. I'm trying to live 5 lives at the same time because I know I only get one, right? So I don't think that's how everybody should do it, but I love being an architect, and I love finding ways to inspire and delight people, clients in the profession, out of the profession. I think what's interesting as I kind of step back and look at our profession is, and kind of the risk averse nature that we've taken on, it's harder and harder to be that kind of master builder. And so I think we need to come up with a better definition of where our value lies. Is it in the total package, or is it in a piece of the puzzle? Are we the puzzle maker, the puzzle builder, or are we part of the solution to the puzzle? I think that is something that should be debated and kind of collaborated on at every different meeting like this, because a lot of times I think we can provide more value if we have more focus. I feel like a lot of times if we tear ourselves in every different direction, then it's hard to do any particular one extremely well, right? It's more of a generalist attitude than an expertise. Is architecture an expertise, or is it an orchestrator of everything? I think that's something definitely worth debating and kind of trying to figure out, because I think we could add value either way, but we would have to change our approach either way as well.
Right. No, that's definitely a good point. And another question that I have is that, so you were talking and you were mentioning that we've been able to have this robust platform of technology. We can, calculate the solar reflection index of a window, electrical loads, all kinds of information. We're putting layers and layers of information.
Yeah.
Yet in the end, we deliver paper drawings for the building officials and contractors to interpret that, and we pretty much took all that data out of the model.
Yeah.
And I remember I saw one of your presentations. You were talking about that paper must die. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think some of the slides I showed in there really speak to that, right? When we're talking about GPS controlled graders, like there's no paper. It's a machine readable file. And I think architects, I know that there are some architects doing this, but for the most part, we're not. We're not creating machine readable files, because when you talk about that embedded information that's get lost as soon as you print it on paper or into a PDF, that's a huge loss, right? I think that's a really terrible way for all of this work that we do to go. So I really am looking forward, and I have seen some examples that are helping us get there of model-based delivery, where the data that is embedded in objects stays there and can be pulled out by anybody who needs it, right? During construction, after construction, during the design process. So yeah, and I also see it coming down to the consumer level. Like every iPhone now, all the iPhone Pros have a LiDAR scanner in them. It's insane, right? You can go out and you can scan a space in like 2 minutes, and you can have something you can measure off that's pretty accurate, like within 5 millimeters from a phone that's in your pocket. That's a normal device. Like it's not a specialty piece of equipment. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's also not like precious, right? So it's pretty crazy to me, the stuff that we're seeing happen, this kind of convergence of technology. And I want to appropriate it for architects. Like I want us to really stop thinking about that rotary, like we're not trying to hang on to the rotary phone of architecture, and we're really trying to push into the future of architecture, and how we can let that data go all the way through the design process through and be usable by construction and the client, ultimately the owner,
We have a few questions in the chat box, if you don't mind me reading those.
Sure.
The first is from Raul Campo. With all these other industries move forward with technology at warp speed, do you see architects as a subservient member of the building team, or its leader in the more traditional sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think we get to decide what we want to be in that situation. And obviously it's not always going to be the same, but kind of going back to one of the earlier questions that Javier posed, are we the master builder? Are we the Renaissance man? Or are we a piece of the puzzle, as I posed it? And I think we could provide incredible value as a valuable piece to the overall puzzle by simply asking all of these other valued partners in the creation process of buildings what they need from us. I think a lot of times we're reinventing or putting in stuff into our models that they ultimately don't need, right? We put it in there because it's what the plan checker wants to see. And there's no alignment over who provides the right information at the right time. It's like we put a bunch of stuff in there to cover our butts from a contract standpoint, from an agency standpoint, but overall it's not useful in the process to others. And I know it's a very complicated web of information, but do you call adding value at a particular point in the process, like as a design architect, subservient? I don't think so, right? It's like owning where your value is versus being an overall orchestrator and doing it all. Like we could decide to do that too, but we would have to basically change how we do everything, right? So that we could own all that risk as well. But they often say, the ones who are willing to take more risk are the ones who can also see more reward. So we have to kind of decide where we want to be in that value chain.
All right. Thank you, Evan. One more question from the group here is from Roger. And Roger, I unmuted you. You'd have to unmute yourself, but if you'd like to add anything to it, please do so. When do you see zoning codes fully control the design through automation?
Roger, if you want to add anything, just jump in. If not, I hope that never happens. I know that I've definitely heard a lot of people talk about, coming up with algorithms that can solve the building problem and just kind of provide a solution rather quickly. But I think we all know as architects that that's not real architecture either, right? It might be a really good starting point. It might take all of the environmental controls and the zoning controls into account and make sure that you are starting from a place where you are less prone to having to redo work. But I'm not interested in doing this to be the most efficient. I think a lot of times we get kind of in the tunnel vision of getting more productive and more efficient through this. What I would rather do is automate the stuff that doesn't need to be refigured out on every single project, like parking, like zoning, and then really add our value where we can. And I would also say that like zoning, even though, okay, so right now when you go to Google and you type something into Google and it gives you a result, like you're not going to really scroll past the first page because you trust it so much, right? So we're kind of already very accepting of the algorithm. What happens to architects when they just start accepting the output of a zoning algorithm and we never push back and say, you know what, that's not the right solution for this city or for this street or for this site? I still think that we still need to have the ability to kind of step in and say, here's a great reason for a variance right here, and it's because of this, this, and this, and point at the data that it showed you. So I am in favor of automating stuff that doesn't need to be figured out again, like toilet stalls and parking stalls and things like that, but I still want to have full creative freedom to solve the problem the best way.
I guess the other part of my question, and I think it's kind of self-evident, but it would, I think in your world that scalability would be an important factor in what you're trying to achieve, correct? In other words, if I have a client that needs a restroom facility upgraded for ADA compliance all the way up to a high-rise building, systems would be in place to assist us at that level, correct?
Absolutely. And I think that should be like baseline kind of stuff that all architects should have access to. I would also say, you know, there's firms that have designed software to do just that. But why doesn't everybody have that? Because by one firm designing that and keeping it to themselves, you know, as you know, intellectual property or whatever you want to call it, you're really holding back the ability for this entire profession to move forward together. And honestly, like we can't rely on software vendors to figure that stuff out for us. I think we have to decide what those things are. So yeah, scalability from like a standpoint of project type and client type, but also from our profession internally.
Then my last point, not to take everyone's time, but how do we sell a client? Do you have any conceptual approaches to selling these ideas to a client other than advertising their efficiency as a main sales point? And then enhancing creativity would be one thought I would have, because it frees us from having to deal with the mundane and we can focus more on the aesthetic perhaps.
Absolutely, but I would also say that like the best way I've found to sell this stuff to clients is to do it with them. Like you see these tools are moving onto the web. You can sit there with them and make decisions together and document those decisions, which is what a set of plans is already, right? It's a series of decisions that have been made, documented. And so when they are a radically included part of that process, by sitting with you making those decisions rather than you going back into your black box, making some decisions and then presenting it to them, but going through that process with them and making it go from this rather uncertain thing to a more certain thing in their midst, that is huge value for these clients who are spending all of their money on this project. So I think that that's a great way to do it, is just include them in that process.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that.
All right, there are no more questions in the chat box right now. So Javier, I'm not sure if you had any more. And if anyone else does have a question, please type it into the chat box or raise your hand.
Thank you. That's a great question. Evan, another point that you mentioned on one of your lectures is about the fact that most of this, that really one of the most consistent patterns of failure of companies to accept or adopt or identify disrupting technologies is by actually doing good business and serving their clients. That's kind of a very scary thought, because that basically means that, and I think Clayton Christensen kind of explains that in their book, but that basically that level of comfort or just by accepting the status quo does not allow you to see these other new technologies.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's an important distinction about what disruptive technologies are. Is that the incumbent? We would be the incumbents in this versus the newcomers who are coming in. Their clients are not our clients, so we don't really see them as a threat because they're not taking away my clients. And then I would put in parentheses yet, right? They're doing something that is way cheaper, typically way faster. Maybe it's happening on their phone now instead of them coming into an office to do something. Maybe it's access to information that they're getting that they don't have to come to me for anymore. But I still have my clients that I have, right? I've still got my K-12 school districts. I've still got my higher ed clients. I've still got my healthcare clients. They're not going after those. But the clients that they are serving are going to become those people in the future, right? So they are going to become the K-12 administrators. They are going to become the higher ed administrators. They're going to become the healthcare administrators. And by then, they're going to be so used to working with that newcomer. And that newcomer is going to be building their platforms to address their growing needs over time that pretty soon they're just going to take over that segment, because the people who are my clients will then see what they're doing as being much faster, cheaper, better, et cetera, and they will switch over. And it's like a landslide. It just happens all of a sudden. There's a lot of really interesting examples out there of this happening where they disintermediate the professionals that were previously known as the gatekeepers of that information. So by building these platforms online, like I showed you today, like Hypar, like TestFit, no longer does somebody even have to go to an architect to get this stuff. And what's crazy is the people building those tools love architecture, but they're doing it because they're so sick of doing it the old way. And we have a lot of architects who will not let go of doing it the old way. And so there's this kind of internal battle that's raging, and there will just come a day when those newcomers who are coming in with this disruptive technology, all of our clients will just leave and go to them. And obviously that's a worst case scenario, and it's kind of dramatic, but it's something that happens slowly over time until it happens like a landslide. And that's, I think, the thing that we really need to pay attention to. We don't really notice the glacier melting, but if you go back and visit it in 20 years, it's gone, right? So that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of perspective I think we need to have.
And then Roger has another question here. He has employee skills and training, suggestions on those. And Roger, I have unmuted you if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, so employee skills and training in my group, in our office, that is the third leg of our stool. We have design technology, which is like really meant at early stage of design and making sure we embed data in from an early stage and it lives all the way through a project. We have BIM technology, which I think everybody has. And then there's training. Nobody has the training part, and everybody relies on the youngsters to either come out of school with the training, which schools are not doing anymore. They don't have time for that. So they just give everybody a LinkedIn learning license, and they just know that the students will pick it up because they have to. But my take on that is I want to provide the training, because if I don't provide the training, they're just going to use whatever way they learned, and that isn't necessarily the way that my firm wants them to do it. And so I want to invest in my people, whether they stay in my firm or not, right? So I think that's an important attitude to take, is we're going to train them for the betterment of them, but also it will kind of leak out into the profession at large. If you don't train them, they'll figure it out on their own, or they'll just go somewhere else where they'll get that. And you don't always want them to figure it out on their own, because then they're not going to follow your standards and your way of doing things. So we do that. We create all of our own courses. We create all of our own curriculum. I hired a guy to be a lead trainer. And I know this sounds kind of luxurious and not everybody can do it, but it was a intentional investment that we made into our people. And the elevator pitch is, we want to raise the digital IQ of everybody in our company. Raising that digital IQ is how we are going to deliver projects in the future. And if we don't invest in them, I just don't think it's fair to expect people to do that on nights and weekends. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a road into it.
No, you did answer it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we have another comment or question by Raul. How would you approach the schools of architecture that seem to be a constant extension of past methodologies? Are they the glacier that is melting?
Yeah, like academia is a whole other thing. I mean, it runs the whole spectrum. I pretty much, if I was to generalize, I would say that architecture schools are training people for the way we used to practice or the way that we currently are, but not for the future of practice. So I do believe that this is a really important piece of that puzzle to get the schools to train for how we want the profession to be, but we also have to kind of start with the end in mind. So it is kind of a chicken and the egg problem, but I think it's something that we have to do. And I would also say another big piece of that puzzle is licensure. We have to license architects to practice the way that the world works now and will work in the future. I still think it's pretty much licensing people for the way that it has always worked in the past. So is it the glacier that's melting? Not every school is the glacier that's melting, but I think for the, again, just to generalize, yeah, we're teaching people to be a worker in a firm. We're licensing people to be sole proprietors. So those two things are not in alignment. And what we should be doing is training leaders. We should set the definition of what the value of an architect is and train people to become that and deliver it over and over and over again.
And then Raul did add, is tenure not the impediment?
Yeah,
that's Raul's comment, not mine.
Yeah, I taught for 10 plus years, and I think, it depends, but obviously there's a disconnect between practice and a lot of tenured professors who don't practice in particular. There's many that do as well, right? But yeah, the whole education system is built on that, and that's a great comment.
And then Roger, if you want to unmute yourself, you can add to this too. Roger put in cross-platform compatibility, and I assume you're going back to your previous questions, Roger.
Yes, I just wondered how you've experienced the ability to communicate with other systems or softwares with your approach.
I think we're moving slowly away from the app-based model. I think we are moving more and more into the cloud where that doesn't matter. I was just speaking with a colleague from SOM just the other day, and everybody has a Chromebook. And so I think you've all heard that before because that's what they do in K-12 education, right? All of their compute is happening in the cloud. So they've got really powerful data centers with lots of hardware. And I know that that doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody's SOM, but you would be surprised how easy it is to set up a virtual desktop and have a very lightweight laptop and have all of that stuff happening on the other end of a web browser. So cross-platform compatibility, I think, we don't live there right now. We have people using ArchiCAD and it doesn't talk to Revit, and we got people using Rhino, and they've been talking about interoperability between all these applications for the last 15 years, and we're still having that same conversation. But we're seeing a huge push to the cloud. Rhino is operating in the cloud, Hypar is operating in the cloud, and I know people find comfort in the tools that they use, and it's hard to kind of move to new tools, but when you're talking about being able to run the application on your phone, on your iPad, on your laptop, on your desktop, it doesn't matter what the hardware is. That's really compelling. So I don't know what happens when the internet doesn't work, but it's one of those things where we're going to stop worrying about what file format we're using, and we're just going to be transferring data between these apps, and they're going to talk the same. So I'm really excited about that. Unfortunately, we're just not quite there yet.
Thank you very much for the input. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger, for your questions. And there are no more questions in the question box, and we've come to about the top of the hour. Javier, I wasn't sure if you had any last thoughts before we thank Evan for his time.
Well, yes, it's kind of a question and kind of to wrap up and get your latest thoughts, Evan, and thank you so much for being today. I think it was a great presentation. There's a thought that I saw on one of your podcasts where you were talking about how you adopt these technologies, right? It's easy to get excited about these new technologies and try to figure out how can we use them. But what you were saying is we should go backwards. We should find out the most meaningful thing we do and use the technology to help us get us there.
Yep. Absolutely. I think that's it. Like these tools are a means to the end. We should not glorify the tools. I'm just excited by the opportunities that they give us, and for the new ways of work and for the new ways of making decisions and backing that up with data, or having these kind of rules and constraints drive the design so that we're not spinning our wheels going down pathways that we potentially don't have to go down. So, but to your point, Javier, I mean, it really is, we need to start at the beginning and say, like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? How are we going to add values? How are we going to tie those to the outcomes that our clients need? And then work backwards and figure out how we're going to get there. And I guess, you know, when you think about the whole marketing campaign of there's an app for that, it's true. Like there's tons of apps to do all these different things. We can write our own if we have to. We can work in the cloud. We can collaborate. We can do all, if anything that 2020 has taught us is that we can work in the cloud together and collaborate, right? So to me, there's so much tool proliferation, and they do talk to each other pretty darn well. So instead of worrying about how you're going to solve this problem with SketchUp or how you're going to solve this problem with Revit, no, like what's the actual thing we're trying to solve, and then use the appropriate tool to get there.
Yeah, that's great. Evan, thank you so much. We're very, very happy to have you today, and I'm pretty sure it was one of the best lectures we've had.
All right, that's it for this presentation. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around. If you're still here, I appreciate your time and attention. I know that it's valuable, and I hope that this provides value to you and just exposing this technology that's happening right now within the profession of architecture. I think one of the slides that gets the most laughs and feedback is also one of the most important slides in this presentation, and that's the one about the two things that architects hate. We're not satisfied with the way things are, but we're also not willing to change because change is hard. And if I had to kind of highlight one thing that I see over and over again within the profession of architecture, is that architects really have a hard time grappling with being proactive about change, taking the time to learn about this stuff and to be the designers of our own future and to disrupt ourselves. One of the things I said in that presentation was, you know, we have to make sure that we disrupt ourselves, because I think a lot of times people think that somebody else is going to do that. I would change it how I would say it now. I didn't say it quite eloquently enough. Obviously, we don't want to become disruptive, so that is why we should be the ones who do it to ourselves. We know the most about our profession. We know the most about everything that goes into what it takes to get this degree, what it takes to get licensed, what it takes to own and operate firms, to be successful with our clients, to create change in our communities. So why shouldn't we be the ones who take that by the horns and actually do it? That would be my challenge to you. So again, check out the links in the description below for the companies that I talked about and the products that they're offering, and definitely look further into those beyond this presentation. It's not enough just to know this stuff exists. You actually need to play with it. You actually need to be ready for when it becomes standard. If you wait until after it becomes standardized, you will be extremely late to the party. So I encourage you in 2021, grab this technology, run with it, make amazing things, create value for our communities, create value for our profession, create value for the future professionals that are working their way up in our profession so that they can take it to new heights. All right, so there you go. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.